Welcome back to Set Asides. Thank you for joining us. In studio, I'm joined by Mac Malaka. He's a poet and author. Dan Kekani from DPSA is the acting provincial manager, as well as Jean Elphick. She's a program manager for Afrika Tikkun. Now we're going to take a look at KwaZulu-Natal and then continue our in-studio discussion. While the Constitution protects all citizens, some people living with a disability feel they are being discriminated in communities. This has come out in some areas where our SA Decides team visited communities. This brings to the fore the question of whether the laws are being applied adequately. In KwaZulu-Natal, the team that found communities do not provide adequate support to people with disabilities. Team KZN in Durban has the story.
What I can say about people with disabilities now is that even though we have rights, but what is needed is the awareness to people. People don't understand the life of people with disabilities. When I'm talking about awareness, I'm trying to say other people need to be aware how to give assistance, how to help, how to meet people with disabilities, how to handle them. Because in some times they treat people with disabilities in a strange way. They put us aside, they take advantage over us. So that's why I'm saying we need to have an awareness.
People are shy and say, I cannot do this because people, they are going to look at me. People, they're going to, say something and shout and say, you can't. But we are not enough and stronger, ourselves. We are not enough and stronger ourselves. The disabled people, they need a housing. They're not getting the houses, RDP houses. The disabled people, they need the education. They're not getting a good education. There's a few schools for the disabled people. The disabled people, they also need the what do you call it, the business skills or leadership, but they're not getting it. They're not getting it. But the government say everything is there, but who's doing it? Nobody doing it.
Like Wiseman and Ndwandwe with special needs say their rights are not being upheld, but he says he will continue to encourage those like him to vote, as the more they vote, the more their voices will be heard. Nobuhle Nkoma, ANN7, KwaMashu, KwaZulu-Natal.
Now, before the break, we were speaking about how to spread awareness. Jean, I just want to ask you how that awareness can be spread in a meaningful, proper manner.
Okay. I work very closely, mostly with mothers of children with disabilities, and I really do feel like they and their children are the best people to deliver messages about tolerance and a change of attitude. I think disability, so much of disablement or the experience of disability comes from the attitudes of people around you. And so if you have one-on-one interactions or meet people with disabilities, I think that experience itself can help shift people's attitudes. So mostly what we do is try, firstly, for the caregivers of children with disabilities to have a better understanding about their rights and about their children's rights, and also how to communicate effectively and as consumers of sort of public services about what their children's rights are and the fact that they have just as much right to education or decent healthcare as everybody else. But we also do take every possible opportunity to speak in public and to advocate on a more sort of on a wider platform. But I think the most powerful thing is really to share honest stories. The other thing that we try as much as possible is to help families to speak to the people that live closest around them, to be honest, to say, look, yeah, my child, you know, I'm sorry, you might see him jumping off the roof every now and then and running around or getting lost, but please understand that this is his situation. This is our situation as a family, and really the way that you to our child and to our family is something that is a make or break. Yeah, so to try and really interact on a one-on-one basis, I think really makes a difference. And often, yeah, absolutely. And I think quite often it's even within the family. You know, when you have the mother-in-law that's comparing one child to another that's, you know, it's the same age, or that's something that starts that internal oppression of a child with some impairment right from little.
Psychological detachment, like has psychological episodes and all that stuff when he grows up, because he or she does not really see himself as adequate enough to actually compete with or be part of a certain place, you know, compete with other children, because it's almost a self-fulfillment prophecy in a way, you know, because I think it's very important that that we must shut these things in our own families, in our own homes, of comparison and all that stuff, you know, and in a sense that to encourage our children to become more than to give them a sense of a positive mental attitude, you know. Even though, you know, I mean, if a child comes and says, "This is my painting," you don't shut him or her down that and look at it and say, no, Wapota, this is not good. This is so and so, you know. I mean, it's nice, my boy. It's very great. You know, how about you add some color, kind of a situation, you know, encouragement. And it begins at home, definitely, for sure, you know. And then I think for some of us, especially who are actually on stage, it's very important that we put the awareness of this whole thing about disability, especially how you actually relate or come the word disability itself, you know, like we were talking earlier on that you don't want to offend or anything like that, you know. I mean, what's disabled is a machine, you know, and I think it's very important that we bring it out there to communities, to people who don't know what's it saying disabled, not a person, you know. Yeah. So it's people with disabilities rather, you know.
Mac, you're speaking about the need for people, especially who are on stage, to stand out. How important are role models in getting rid of this thing that you were talking about of children having internal pressure and internal angst in curing this?
It's very important, my sister. It's extremely important, because I think as children we need role models. Period. You know, and from as a guy, man, you know, and as a man, and my father is my biggest role model. Is like my biggest hero. I aspire to become like my father because he was there. He taught me how to become a man amongst men, and man of equality, a man of actually see the world from a progressive perspective, you know. And if you don't have that at home, we look for it in other places, and a lot of those places now become art, you know. It is very important that we in our art we not only, because art is an an integral part of a people's culture, you know. It addresses issues from across the board, you know. And I think it's very important that we have on our television shows, I mean on our media that we have a superhero that actually is in a wheelchair, you know, so that a child who's actually in a wheelchair grows up thinking, oh man, this is actually all right. It's actually cool to be half man, half car, you know, kind of a situation, you know. So I think it's extremely important that even in our art that we portray people with disability in a much more X-Men kind of a light, you know, that everybody can relate to in a way, you know, seriously, because there's nothing wrong with you, my child. There's nothing wrong with you, buddy. You know, there's nothing wrong with you. Seriously, there is nothing wrong with you. What's wrong is the people's perception about you outside of you.
Dan?
I think television is one of the most powerful instruments, because we are living in a digital age now, whereby each and every child out there has got a moment or two to watch television, if not the whole day of their lives when they are not at school. And for us to be able to create the heroes out of the disabled people, we must plant in their minds that a disabled person is as normal as anybody can be. And a disabled person can do anything that he aspires to do, as long as that person is given a chance by the that he lives in. The most important part, again, that I'm going to stress and reiterate is that our Mfundi Vundlas should stop creating disability that is abstract. You get Sibusiso, who is on a wheelchair. The next thing, when he's angry and wanting to hit on somebody, he's standing up. And that's the kind of perceptions that we want to do away with. When he wants people on wheelchairs to act, they must put people on wheelchairs to play those roles, so that we create people who are on wheelchairs that are becoming faces of our society. If we don't do that, then we are failing as a society to accept who we are and to accept disability as a whole. And more than anything, the only thing that really disables disability is the society.
Whose responsibility is this to push for things like you were saying?
If you look at reality, especially South African reality, you would agree we come from the apartheid past. I'm sorry, people keep saying stop blaming apartheid, stop saying things about apartheid, but the legacy of apartheid still lives on.
Yes.
During the olden days, during the apartheid days, in the black communities, there were no schools that were accessible for disabled people. That's the beginning. Now, 20 years down the line, would you want to tell me that we've got a lot of disabled people who are educated? No, because it's a concept that has just been created, whereby there are schools that can now accept disabled people in their classrooms. Our grandmothers used to leave kids in their houses, locked in the bedrooms for the whole day. Why? Because she had to go and fend for the others and for this one, that there must be food at the end of the day in the house. And people used to look at that as if that woman has got a, how can she lock the child in the house for the whole day? But look, she had to go and fend for the others, even for that one who is disabled. But the society we live in didn't even have room for that child who was disabled. Now, when you get disabled at an adult age, when you have to go back to school, it's a problem in South Africa for you. Right now, for a child who is over a certain age, is no longer allowed at school. That child must go to, what do they call this? That child should go to a special school. What do they call it?
A resource center.
Yes, to the resource centers and stuff like that, which is not good. But if we can try to make sure that all kids who are disabled are taken to the mainstream schools and are accepted in the mainstream schools, yes, I accept the fact that some cases are too extreme that they would need a special school. Yes, let those who need special schools go to special schools. But our schools in the townships should be able to accept disabled schools. That's what inclusivity means.
Am I hearing
inclusive
that
education.
20 years into democracy there has been a radical enough change to accept people with
Accessibility.
Across the spectrum, you talk of employment. There is a 2% benchmark that was placed in 1994 when the first democratic government came into place in South Africa, and there was a 2% that was put in place that people, the workforce of all government departments and private companies, at least they should have a 2% workforce, or a 2% of people who are disabled working in their departments or in their companies. I'm telling you, up until today, no one has ever met that 2%. You talk about a business sector whereby when we hear the budget speech being announced, there is a big chunk of money that is mentioned there that they say is earmarked for disability. Yet you go to the government departments for business ventures, you are streamlined into everybody's. The database does not even, choose or does not have any special for people who are disabled or who are not disabled. You all are cooked in one pot. Now, you ask yourself, how then do they access those funds, the disabled people? Employment, there is nothing that has been, the 2% has not been reached up to now. Academically, the private sector had to come in and say, look, because we know that disabled people have been lagging behind, let us now try to make sure that we take a lot of disabled people and try to put them to school and make sure that we create educated people out of the disabled people. But that is not happening. It's happening in drips and drabs. All you get is learnerships that are going to last, and after learnership you go stay home, learnerships, stay home, learnerships, stay home. At the end of the day, it doesn't. Yes, it's kind of a favor kind of a thing. At the end of the day, you have disabled people who are still right at the bottom of the value chain.
Gina, has this been your experience?
Yeah, maybe I can share a kind of practical experience that really illustrates the reality. I work just south of Johannesburg. The closest schools where children with sort of moderate impairments can go would cost their parents at least 500 Rand a month just in transport to get to school. And that's if they actually are offered a place at the school. At the beginning of last year, I had hundreds of children on my database that were in their compulsory school-going age, but that were not at school or had never been to school. And so I did a bit of a phone survey, and I called all the sort of special school resource centers in Gauteng that were within an hour and a half's drive from the township where I work. From the 32 schools that I called, from this sort of list of phone numbers that I issued with, only 20 of them answered the phone, and of those, only 3 didn't have massive waiting lists. 2 of them were only for children with visual impairments, and the final one only had a few spaces in a class for girls that were 13 years old that didn't need nappies. So in the end, I wasn't able to find one child from my database that could actually fill any of those spaces. And in addition to that, yeah, it's true, these learnerships do come up all the time. And they're sort of learnerships or job opportunities or so on. And most of them require a matric certificate. I do not have one person on my database with a matric certificate.
Is it true that what Dan is saying, that the private sector appears to be doing more than government?
Well, I think in the past, the private sector have really had to fill the gap. The fact of the matter is, though, that we have now been living in a country that for 20 years, the right to education is non-progressive, meaning we don't have to wait for things to finally get there, like housing, It's something that should be realized tomorrow. But the reality is that absolutely is not happening.
And the situation that you mentioned with the schools, if you had to be in charge of making sure that problem did not arise again, what steps would you implement?
It's really difficult because, of course, children that have a spectrum of needs do require more staff, and it is more expensive to include children with all sorts of different needs. But what's really expensive is to run these sort of separated special schools with really specialist facilities. And so our policies do say that children with disabilities, as far as possible, should be integrated into schools close to where they live. That they can actually get to, firstly, that where transport is not a kind of major logistical and financial barrier, and also where they might have some access to sort of meaningful education. of course, we do have to acknowledge that for all children in South Africa, I think access to a good quality basic education is still a challenge.
Sure.
So it's not just children with impairments that are facing barriers to learning. There are also, there are many other barriers. But really, there are schools in every area. There are schools in townships and all over the place. Those schools should be open to children. And the staff, right from their basic training as teachers, should be taught to deal with a spectrum of different children with different needs. It shouldn't be some specialist thing tacked on at the end.
Now, Dan spoke earlier on about the legacy of apartheid and how it still affects us in South Africa today. I don't think anyone doubts that. When it comes to people who are living in poverty and people who have a disability, mix those two together. What happens and how much of an issue is this that we're seeing?
It is a very, very serious issue. Let me tell you, my sister. The problem here in South Africa is that the disabled people are marginalized even when it comes to housing. In all spaces, in all spheres of life, they are the last to be thought of, and they are last to be catered for. And the painful part about the situation is that they are the lowest income group, the lowest, because they are the most uneducated, and their life in itself for being disabled becomes expensive, because what is going to take you 10 rands or 20 rands for you to travel from point A to point B, it might need me more, because the taxis that travel that route might not be accessible for me, meaning I have to hire a car that's going to be able to transport me from point A to point B.
That is the problem about
now, that makes disability a big problem from that position. When it comes to employment, the bosses will tell you, hey, this building, I'm renting this building, and I came to this building only 5 years ago. Yes, I do want to hire disabled people, but now at the end of the day, there is no ablution facilities that are accessible for a disabled person. And now, if I have to rack this place up and build toilets that are accessible for a disabled person, that's going to be a bit expensive for me. They don't want to spend money. To them is profit, so they won't do that. Or when it comes to education, the teachers at those lower level schools, at the primary schools, they would tell you, or if this child gets a fit, what will I do? I don't even know what to do. Then they run away from. Yes.
One of the things that came up when we were speaking to people across the provinces in South Africa, where people were saying if there was a person with disability in Parliament, they feel like things would change. Do you agree with that view?
There is a person. There's the minister of she's a deputy minister of women, children, and disability. She's visually impaired, not that, I don't know, I think I can say it, but there is somebody who actually has a disability in the parliament, actually.
There is quite a number of people who are disabled who are already in parliament now. We've got quite a number of people. We also have people who come from DPSA who are now members of parliament. I can tell you that, to be honest with you, the South African government, the current government, and yes, it has done much in order to move disability forward. It has done much in order to mainstream disability. They're not just talking, but you can see some action. But I think the private sector has to come to the fore here and play a role. And I think the community at large also has to come to the party so that disability is properly mainstreamed, But in all fairness, I don't think the blame still lies with the government, because especially when you look at the issues of employment, I think that's the problem that's lying at managerial level. It's no longer at the government level. It's at managerial level. The managers or the HR direct DDGs, DGs, they are the ones who should be hiring the people who are disabled into their workforce, and they are not doing it because they are not
accessibility, my brother. Honestly, it's accessibility, because so many buildings. You are quite right when you say you're the last person they think of, and it's best.
I'm going to ask you to hold on. Dan was saying that community, government, everyone needs to work together. If I can each get from you how this will happen and how this can happen very briefly.
The best method would be the community should come to the disabled people and accept the disabled people as human beings. Start working with them. Get to understand them. Don't stigmatize them when you see them. The government, when I say it has done much, but it also has to make sure that they conscientize their DDGs and DGs that you must start working with the disabled people and you must start hiring the disabled people because...
Jean?
I believe very strongly in empowerment. I feel that people need to feel like they have the power to access society on an equal basis to others.
Okay.
They need to know where to go, who to speak to, and what to do.
Cool. Matt?
Yeah.
Education is every South African child's birthright, you know.
Cool. Thank you very much to all our guests for their insight. It's a wrap off this edition of SA Decides. We'll see you tomorrow at 5 p.m. with a fresh issue. After the break, ANN 7 Prime with Nadine Johnson. Good evening.